The battlefield was a graveyard of metal and fire. The war between humans and the HFY had turned this once thriving planet into a wasteland of smoke and death. The ground was littered with broken weapons, shattered armor, and the bodies of soldiers who had fought until their last breath. The air smelled of burning fuel and blood, thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. Explosions still rumbled in the distance, echoing through the ruins of what had once been a great city. Captain Ryan Carter moved carefully through the wreckage, his rifle gripped tightly in his hands. His squad had already pushed forward, clearing the area of any remaining threats, but he stayed behind for one last check. The mission was simple: eliminate any surviving HFY warriors and secure the battlefield. The enemy had fought hard, but in the end, they had been overpowered. Most of the alien soldiers were dead or had retreated, leaving behind only scattered wreckage. Then he saw it. A large figure lay motionless among the debris, half buried beneath the twisted remains of a destroyed transport ship. The armor was unmistakable, dark, battle-worn, and marked with the insignia of the HFY. Ryan hesitated, raising his rifle, his heart pounding. The alien was still alive. General Jarak, one of the HFY's most feared warriors, lay on his back, his breathing ragged. His massive reptilian body was covered in deep wounds, his once powerful limbs unmoving. His red eyes flickered open, filled with pain, but also something else: awareness. He was paralyzed, trapped in his own broken body. His people had left him behind. His enemies had no reason to help him. Ryan had heard stories about Jarak. The general was a legend, known for leading countless victories against human forces. He was ruthless, a killer, a war machine. And yet at this moment he was nothing more than a dying soldier, abandoned to his fate. The war had taken everything from him. Ryan took a step closer, gripping his weapon tightly. One shot would end it. One pull of the trigger, and the war would lose one of its deadliest leaders. It was the logical thing to do. His orders were clear: eliminate all remaining HFY. But something stopped him. The look in Jarak's eyes was not that of a warrior ready to die. It was not hatred or defiance. It was something Ryan had not expected. A silent question. A plea. Why? For a moment, Ryan stood frozen, his mind racing. The right choice was obvious. Jarak was the enemy. Saving him would be betrayal. His own people would never understand. But deep down, Ryan knew what he had to do. His father had once told him that a true soldier did not fight just for orders. A true soldier fought for what was right. Taking a deep breath, Ryan lowered his rifle. He glanced around, making sure no one was watching. Then, with a sense of finality, he stepped forward and knelt beside the fallen warrior. The alien flinched slightly, expecting an attack, but Ryan only reached for the heavy debris pinning him down. With a grunt, he pushed against the wreckage, his muscles straining. The metal groaned as it shifted, freeing Jarak's massive frame. The alien let out a low, pained sound, his breathing ragged. Ryan knew he was hurt badly. Without help, he wouldn't survive for long. Ryan hesitated. If he left now, no one would ever know. He could walk away and pretend he had never seen the HFY general. His mission would be complete. He would be safe. But he couldn't do it. Gritting his teeth, he pulled Jarak's arm over his shoulder and struggled to lift him. The alien was heavy, nearly twice Ryan's size, and moving him was no easy task. Every step was slow, every breath was a battle. But he kept going. As he moved, he heard voices in the distance. His squad was nearby, searching the battlefield. If they saw him like this, it would be over. Heart pounding, Ryan dragged the alien toward a nearby ruined building, slipping into the shadows just in time. He pressed his back against the cold wall, breathing hard as the voices grew closer. "Clear over here," one of the soldiers called out. "Nothing but bodies," another answered. "Let's move." Ryan stayed completely still, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps passed by, fading into the distance. Only when he was sure they were gone did he move again. Zarak groaned, his head tilting toward Ryan. His voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. Why? Help. Enemy? Ryan didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. So he just shook his head and kept moving. The war was not over. His actions might cost him everything. But for now, in this moment, he had made his choice. And there was no turning back. Ryan's breathing was heavy as he carried the alien warrior into the ruined building. His muscles burned from the weight of Zarak, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Every second they stayed in the open was a risk. If his squad found him helping the enemy, they wouldn't hesitate. They would call him a traitor. They would kill Zarak on sight. And Ryan. He would be lucky if they only threw him in a cell. He laid the alien down against the cold, cracked wall. The dim light from the broken ceiling cast deep shadows across the room. Zarak groaned, his breathing slow and uneven. His wounds were bad. Deep cuts ran along his armored chest, and his legs were completely still. The paralysis had taken over, leaving him helpless. Ryan pulled off his gloves and quickly checked the wounds. Blood, thick and dark blue, seeped from a gash along Zarak's side. It wasn't a normal wound. It looked like a plasma burn, the kind that caused nerve damage. That explained why the alien couldn't move. Even if he survived, he might never walk again. Zarak's red eyes flickered open, his gaze locked onto Ryan, filled with confusion and pain. He coughed, his voice barely a whisper. Why? Ryan didn't know how to answer. He should have left Zarak there to die. That's what everyone else had done. That's what he was supposed to do. Instead, he had risked everything to save an enemy. His own people would never understand. Maybe he didn't either. The ground suddenly shook as a distant explosion rocked the city ruins. The war was still raging, but the main battle had moved farther away. The human forces were pushing forward, leaving this area behind. Ryan realized that meant something important. No one was coming back here. For a brief moment, he considered his options. He could leave now, slip back to his squad, and pretend this never happened. No one would ever know he had helped the enemy. He could say he had found nothing. It was the safe choice, the right choice. But something inside him refused to walk away. Zarak watched him in silence, studying him like he was trying to understand why a human would risk his life for HFY. His breathing was getting weaker. If Ryan left now, the alien wouldn't last much longer. Ryan clenched his fists, his mind battling with itself. If he stayed, he was throwing away everything, his career, his life, maybe even his own people. But if he walked away, he would be letting someone die when he had the power to stop it. He took a slow breath. Then he made his decision. Ryan pulled a small medkit from his belt and opened it. He had no idea if human medicine would even work on an alien like Zarak, but it was all he had. He grabbed a sterilizing cloth and pressed it against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Zarak let out a deep growl of pain but didn't move. He was too weak. The silence between them was heavy. Ryan didn't know if Zarak would even survive the night, but at least now he had a chance. A sudden sound outside made Ryan freeze. Voices. His squad was nearby, searching the ruins. Ryan quickly moved to the doorway, peering through a crack in the broken wall. A group of soldiers was walking through the wreckage, scanning for survivors. If they came inside, if they saw what he was doing, it would all be over. His heart pounded in his chest. He turned back to Zarak, who was watching him carefully. The alien warrior understood the danger. He knew Ryan was risking his own life, but he said nothing. Ryan pressed his back against the wall, gripping his rifle, ready for the worst. The voices grew louder. Footsteps crunched against the rubble. Ryan held his breath. Then, the footsteps faded. The voices disappeared into the distance. Ryan exhaled, his hands still trembling. Zarak's weak voice broke the silence. "You, should leave. Ryan shook his head. Not yet. The war was still going. His squad was still out there. But for now, in this abandoned building, Ryan had made his choice. And there was no turning back. Ryan stayed hidden in the shadows, listening as the voices of his squad faded into the distance. His hands were still gripping his rifle tightly, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had just come seconds away from being discovered. If his team had walked a little closer, if they had looked inside this ruined building, they would have seen everything. They would have seen him with an enemy. And then, it would have been over. He let out a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. His decision had already been made. There was no turning back now. Zarak shifted slightly, wincing from the pain. His breathing was uneven, his massive chest rising and falling in slow, heavy movements. The alien warrior was barely holding on. Ryan knew he had to do something, and fast. He crouched beside the wounded HFY, studying his injuries again. The bleeding had slowed, but the paralysis hadn't gone away. Whatever weapon had hit Zarak, it had done more than just damage his body. It had taken away his ability to move. If Ryan left him here, he wouldn't even be able to crawl to safety. Zarak's red eyes flickered open again. Wyatt, still here. His voice was weak, barely more than a growl. Ryan didn't answer right away. He didn't know how to explain it, not even to himself. He should have left by now. That was the logical thing to do. That was what every other soldier would have done. But something about this felt different. This wasn't just about war anymore. He reached into his supply bag, pulling out a small water pack. Without a word, he lifted it to Zarak's mouth. The alien hesitated at first, confused by the gesture, but then drank greedily. Ryan watched him for a moment, then finally spoke. I don't leave people to die. His voice was quiet, but firm. Zarak let out a weak, dry chuckle. Even enemies. Ryan sighed. Right now, you're just a soldier who got left behind, just like me. Silence hung between them. The war outside still raged on. But here, in this ruined building, everything felt still. Ryan knew they couldn't stay here much longer. His squad might have passed by now, but they could come back. And if they found him hiding an enemy, he would be executed for treason. He had to find a way out. He had to get Zarak to safety. But where? The planet was a war zone. The human army had taken control of most of the land, and the HFY forces were either dead or had retreated. There was nowhere safe for either of them. Ryan's mind raced through his options. There had to be something. A place where he could hide. A place where he could figure out what to do next. Then he remembered. Before the battle, his squad had come across an old supply station hidden beneath the ruins. It was abandoned now, its entrance buried under rubble, but the underground rooms were still intact. If he could reach it, they would have shelter. They would have a chance. He turned back to Zarak. I'm going to move you, he said. We can't stay here. Zarak's gaze was unreadable. You risk too much. Ryan smirked slightly. Yeah. Well, I've never been good at following orders. Carefully, he crouched down and lifted Zarak's arm over his shoulder. The alien was heavy, almost impossible to carry, but Ryan gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but he pushed forward. Step by step, he moved toward the back of the ruined building, staying low, staying silent. The supply station wasn't far, but reaching it wouldn't be easy. If they were spotted, there would be no second chances. Ryan tightened his grip on his rifle, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the ruins. The escape had begun. Ryan moved carefully through the ruins, his body tense with every step. The weight of Zarak slowed him down, but he had no choice. The alien warrior was too weak to move on his own, and leaving him behind wasn't an option. The abandoned supply station wasn't far, maybe a 10-minute walk under normal conditions, but nothing about this was normal. The city was quiet, but Ryan knew that didn't mean it was safe. The battle had moved farther away, but soldiers were still patrolling the area, searching for survivors. If they saw him carrying an enemy, they wouldn't ask questions. They would shoot first. Zarak grunted in pain as Ryan adjusted his grip. "You are stubborn." His voice was low, weak. Ryan smirked, though his heart was still pounding. "Yeah, I get that a lot." He kept moving, staying close to the shadows of broken buildings. The streets were filled with wreckage, burned-out vehicles, shattered walls, and bodies that hadn't been retrieved yet. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and death. Ryan ignored it, focusing on his goal. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Ryan froze, pressing himself against a cracked concrete wall. He listened carefully. More than one person. Boots crunching against debris. Voices, human voices. A patrol. His grip on his rifle tightened. He wasn't sure how many there were, but it didn't matter. He couldn't fight them, not while carrying Zarak. He had to hide. Zarak understood the danger too. His breathing slowed, his massive frame unmoving. Ryan could feel the tension in the alien's body. Even injured, even helpless, Zarak was still a warrior. The voices grew louder. Ryan could make out words now. "Check over there. I don't think anyone's left. Orders are to search everything. The HFY don't die easy." Ryan's pulse quickened. He glanced around, searching for an escape. The supply station was still too far. They needed cover. Now, his eyes landed on a collapsed building nearby. Part of the roof had caved in, creating a dark, hidden space beneath the rubble. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. Ryan tightened his grip on Zarak and moved as quickly as he could. Every step felt like a lifetime. The footsteps were getting closer. Finally, he reached the collapsed building and slid inside, pressing himself and Zarak into the shadows. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe, but he didn't move. He barely even dared to blink. The soldiers were right outside. Ryan could see their shadows through the cracks in the rubble. They were close, too close. If one of them turned just a little, if they looked in the right direction, it would be over. He held his breath. One of the soldiers sighed. "This place is a graveyard. No one's alive here." Another voice responded. "Yeah, let's move on." Ryan didn't move, he didn't relax. Not yet. Seconds felt like hours. Then, footsteps. Fading. Growing distant. Ryan finally let out a slow, quiet breath. He turned to Zarak, who was watching him with those deep red eyes. The alien warrior spoke in a whisper. "You risk your life. For an enemy." Ryan gave a small, tired smile. "I don't see an enemy right now. I see someone who needs help." Zarak was silent for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he nodded. Ryan adjusted his grip, preparing to move again. The patrol was gone, but they weren't safe yet. The supply station was still ahead. And the hunt wasn't over. "You said." Ryan pushed forward, moving through the ruins with slow, careful steps. Every muscle in his body burned from carrying Zarak, but he ignored the pain. The supply station was close. He could almost see the entrance beneath the collapsed rubble ahead, just a little further. Zarak's breathing was weak, but he was still awake. His red eyes flickered in the dim light, watching everything. Even injured, the alien warrior's instincts remained sharp. "Something is wrong," he muttered. Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" Zarak's gaze shifted toward the wreckage around them. Too quiet. Ryan hesitated. He had been thinking the same thing. The patrol had left, and no other soldiers had appeared. But the silence felt unnatural. He had been in enough battles to know that danger wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet that meant the worst was coming. He adjusted his grip on his rifle and scanned the area. The supply station's entrance was hidden beneath layers of debris, but Ryan knew the way in. A narrow gap between two fallen concrete slabs led underground. If they could just make it inside, they would have a real chance to rest and plan their next move. Ryan took a step forward, and then he heard it, a sharp click. His stomach turned to ice. That sound, he knew it too well. A motion-triggered mine. Ryan didn't move. His foot was just inches from the device, half buried beneath dust and rubble. One more step, and it would be over. He clenched his jaw. Damn it. Zarak shifted slightly. What is it? Ryan exhaled slowly. Trap. Someone left a mine here. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The supply station wasn't abandoned. Someone had set up defenses. And that meant... A voice rang out from the shadows. Don't move. Ryan stiffened. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see movement in the ruins. Shapes emerged from the darkness. Figures in armor, weapons raised. Not human. Velfar warriors. Ryan's grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't raise it. He was outnumbered. If he fought, he wouldn't last more than a few seconds. One of the Velfar stepped forward, his armor dark and worn from battle. His yellow eyes locked onto Zarak, then shifted to Ryan, a human, carrying one of our own. His voice was filled with suspicion. Ryan didn't answer right away. He was still standing on the edge of a mine. One wrong move, and this conversation wouldn't matter. Zarak struggled to lift his head. Tariq, stand down. The Velfar leader, Tariq, froze. His eyes widened in shock. Zarak, you're alive. Ryan felt the tension in the air shift. These weren't just random Velfar soldiers. They knew Zarak. Zarak coughed, his voice weak. Because of him, he nodded toward Ryan. Tariq's gaze darkened. A human. Ryan finally spoke. I didn't save him because he's Velfar. I saved him because I don't leave people to die. Tariq studied him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he stepped forward and pressed a switch on a small device. The mine near Ryan's foot powered down with a faint hum. Ryan let out a slow breath and stepped back. He wasn't dead. That was a good start. Tariq lowered his weapon, but his expression remained cold. You saved our brother, he said, but that does not make you our friend. Ryan met his gaze. I didn't do it to be your friend. Tariq narrowed his eyes. Then he turned to his soldiers. Take Zarak inside. Two Velfar warriors moved forward and lifted the injured warrior, carrying him toward the hidden entrance. Ryan took a step back, gripping his rifle. He knew what was coming next. Tariq looked at him again. You, human, will come with us. Ryan smirked slightly. Didn't think I had a choice. Tariq didn't smile. No, you don't. Ryan exhaled and followed them into the underground station. He had saved Zarak, but now he was walking straight into the hands of the enemy, and he had no idea if he was going to make it out alive. You said. Ryan stepped cautiously into the underground station, his senses on high alert. The dimly lit tunnels stretched out before him, their walls covered in alien markings. The Velfar warriors walked ahead, their heavy footsteps echoing through the narrow passage. Zarak, still weak, was carried by two of his own kind, disappearing deeper into the base. Ryan's fingers twitched near his rifle, but he didn't reach for it. He knew it wouldn't help him here. He was surrounded, outnumbered, and inside enemy territory. If these Velfar decided he was a threat, he wouldn't stand a chance. Tariq walked beside him, his gaze never leaving Ryan. You are either very brave or very foolish, human. Ryan smirked slightly. I get that a lot. Tariq didn't return the smile. Instead, he gestured to one of the other warriors, who stepped forward and roughly grabbed Ryan's rifle. Ryan let it go without a fight. He knew better than to resist. He wasn't here to start a war. He was here to survive. They moved deeper into the station, passing through large metal doors that hissed open at their approach. Inside, Ryan saw a makeshift command center. Alien devices flickered with strange symbols, and Velfar soldiers worked at control panels, their clawed fingers moving with precision. Zarak was taken to a medical station where HFY healers surrounded him, attaching strange devices to his wounds. Ryan watched from a distance, knowing that whatever happened next wasn't up to him anymore. Tarek turned to face him. "You saved Zarak. That is the only reason you are still breathing. But that does not mean we trust you." Ryan folded his arms. "Didn't expect you to." Tarek studied him, his yellow eyes sharp. "Why did you do it?" Ryan sighed. He had been asked that question too many times. "Because I don't leave people behind. Doesn't matter what side they're on." Tarek was silent for a moment. Then he gestured to a nearby guard. "Take him to the holding room. He stays there until we decide what to do with him." Ryan didn't resist as two HFY warriors led him away. He knew he was lucky to still be alive, but he also knew his fate was far from certain. As the heavy doors locked behind him, he exhaled slowly. He had saved Zarak, but now he was at the mercy of his enemies, and he had no idea if they would let him live. "You said." Ryan sat on the cold metal floor of the holding room, his back against the wall. The small chamber was dimly lit, the only light coming from a narrow slit in the ceiling. The air smelled of metal and damp stone. His rifle was gone, his gear taken. He was completely at their mercy. His mind raced through possibilities. The HFY hadn't killed him yet, which meant they were still deciding what to do. Maybe they would interrogate him. Maybe they would execute him. Or maybe, just maybe, Zarak would convince them to let him go. Ryan had taken a risk saving the alien warrior, but was it enough to make these soldiers see him as something other than an enemy? The door hissed open. Tarek stepped inside, his yellow eyes cold and unreadable. "Come," he ordered. Ryan pushed himself up. He wasn't going to beg. He wasn't going to show fear. If this was the end, he would face it standing. Two guards flanked him as they led him down the corridor. The underground base was larger than he expected, filled with HFY warriors, some injured, others preparing weapons. They weren't just hiding. They were regrouping. They entered a large chamber where Zarak lay on a raised platform, alien medical devices pulsing softly around him. He looked stronger now, his breathing steady. His red eyes met Ryan's as he entered. Tarek stopped and turned to face Ryan. "Zarak speaks for you," he said, "but not all agree." Ryan glanced around. Several HFY warriors stood in a circle, their expressions tense. He could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. An older HFY warrior stepped forward. "You expect us to believe a human saved one of our own out of kindness." His voice was laced with suspicion. "Humans do not show mercy to our kind." Ryan met his gaze. "Maybe you've never met the right kind of human." The warrior bared his sharp teeth in a low growl. "And maybe you are only here to gather information, to betray us when the time comes." Zarak spoke, his voice stronger than before. "He had the chance to kill me. He did not. He had the chance to leave me. He did not." His gaze moved to Tarek. "Without him, I would be dead." Tarek hesitated. Then he looked at Ryan. "You have put us in a difficult position, human." Ryan smirked slightly. "Yeah, I tend to do that." Tarek ignored the remark. "We do not trust you. But Zarak owes you his life. That means we owe you something." Ryan straightened. "Let me go." Murmurs rippled through the HFY warriors. Some looked angry, others uncertain. Tarek shook his head. "It is not that simple. If we let you go, you could reveal our location." Ryan frowned. "If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have carried Zarak across a war zone." Tarek studied him for a long moment. Then he took a deep breath. "There is another option." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Tarek's eyes darkened. "Stay. Fight with us." The room fell silent. Ryan blinked. "You're asking me to betray my own people." Tarek folded his arms. "Your people left you to die. We did not." Ryan clenched his jaw. That was the truth, wasn't it? His squad had abandoned him. They had ordered him to leave Jarak behind. They had treated him as disposable, and yet fighting for the enemy. That was a line he wasn't sure he could cross. Jarak spoke again. "You are a soldier, Ryan. But what do you fight for?" Ryan exhaled slowly. He had always believed in duty, in loyalty. But after everything that had happened, after everything he had seen, he wasn't sure what that meant anymore. He looked around the room, at the faces of the HFY warriors, at Jarak, at the war-torn station. He had a choice to make, and whatever he chose, there was no going back.